Robert, you can sit down.
I'm an angel. My knees don't best.
That's my personal protection.
Thank you very much for agreeing to do this talk for us. The truth is that there's a lot to be said, maybe a whole class into itself, as to the importance of learning history, and specifically Jewish history, and nothing problems, I guess, specifically. The history, the Jewish history of the city in which a person lives, and the Hashgacha Pratis the person is connected to. And so we're very honored that Mordechai has agreed to do this. And without further ado, let him take the stand. After the class is over, we'll bench with the Zimmer.
Okay, thank you everybody for coming. So it was a pleasure to say yes to Rabbi Rappaport. I knew he would twist my arm anyway, so I said yes before that happened. He knew exactly the right buttons to press. So this is before we even get started, like Rabbi Rappaport said, the study of the history of Chicago is something that I kind of fell into by accident, and Mr. Mishkan can attest to this. Became really close with Rabbi Schwartz Zatzal, Rabbi Gedalia Dov Schwartz. And he was anybody that knew him, remembered him, unique in every perspective. And I became close with him. I became close with Rabbi Moshe Kushner. And one day Rabbi Kushner came to me and he said he wants me to prepare. They're putting together, honoring Rabbi Schwartz. They're preparing a book, and he has a section of the book he wanted me to work on, which was a series of shurim and classes which Rabbi Schwartz had given, and that he called the halachic history of America. And in that series of shiurim, Rabbi Schwartz took shilas and tshuvas and discussions from Rabbanim, from across the breadth of American halachic literature, and discussed them, bringing out different points to bring out the questions that really vexed and dealt with the American Jewish society, and to bring out the problems. In the course of preparing those shurim for print, Rabbi Schwartz's mind is unbelievable. And as he would give the shurim, he would mention something, biographical information about the Rabbanim, many of whom he knew personally, or he knew them secondhand. And he could say facts and things about them that nobody knew, or connections that nobody knew. And I got very interested into it. And in the course of preparing, I came across a book called Chachmei New England. It's a relatively small book, but it had 60 rabbis from New England, Massachusetts and New Hampshire, Maine, Vermont, that area, and it talked about them. And I said, I don't get it. I know that we have a lot of rabbis here in Chicago. How come there isn't anything like that here? And I started gathering and amassing information, and that's kind of where my appreciation for this happened. But really, since I've been a kid, I don't know if I would say I've been a Meikir Rabbanan, but I really appreciated rabbis. I looked up to rabbis, every rabbi of all sorts. And that's a little bit of the class that we're going to talk about today. I would call it really, the flyer says forgotten giants of Chicago's rabbinic past. I forgot the forgotten, which is okay. It's almost like the famous Rashi, right? We all know the famous Rashi. What's a famous Rashi? A famous Rashi is any Rashi that I know. If I know it, it's famous. That makes it a famous Rashi. So it's hard for me to say who's a forgotten rabbi, who's not a forgotten rabbi. If you heard of the Rav before, he's not forgotten. If you never heard of him before, he could be as great as he was, but he's forgotten. So that's I was at least one of the kudos. So these are hundreds, I would say hundreds of rabbis inhabited and lived here in Chicago. And every single one of the Rabbanim, this is just a sampling of some of the pictures, and I don't want to forget because I didn't speak about him directly. On the top right corner is the Ridvaz, Yosef David Wolovsky, who was at one point the chief Rav here in Chicago. He ended up leaving the city, but he was one of the greatest of the great rabbinic figures, worldwide, that people recognize that he was here in Chicago. But there were many others. And to paint the picture of who was a Chicago rabbi, It's impossible. And this could really go for any city, but we live here, Baruch Hashem. We're not living across the street in Evanston, so we're here. We're in Chicago still. So, the each Rav is unique. Why is each Rav unique? Each person is unique. Kishem Shaparsa Seyhem Shoinus, just like their faces of people are different, the Seyhem, the people's minds and thoughts are different. The Rabbanim, each one of them were unique in their background, where they came from. Their upbringing, their approach, their hashkafa, their area of influence of each one of the Rabbanim is different. Oops, sorry, I don't know if that popped up. And the impact of the Rabbanim was different, and the needs of the community at each time and each place where each Rav was, and each Kehila where each Rav was different. Right? Like I said before, if I didn't count, there's over 500 Rabbanim in the last 140 years. It's more than that, really. That there have been Rabbanim here since the 1860s, so that's 180 years, right? 500, I would say maybe even 1,000 Rabbanim, depending on how you count and who you count. How did Rabbanim get to Chicago? For the most part, until recently, there were no homegrown Rabbanim. Baruch Hashem, now we have, homegrown Rabbanim. We have yeshivas that are able to produce homegrown Rabbanim. But for the most part, Rabbanim came from Europe. For a number of different reasons. They came, often the reason was financial reasons. Some of them came to fundraise for various institutions, and they ended up staying here or were convinced to stay here. Other people, the Ridvaz, for example, came to fundraise for his Yerushalmi. He was printing Yerushalmi, and then he ended up coming back, and that's how he was introduced to the Kehillah here. Other Rabbanim moved here because of persecution. Either there was pogroms in Russia in the 1880s and beyond. Some people came after the war, after the show, after the Holocaust. Rabbanim came. That's a whole different discussion, by the way, which I'm not discussing now, but it definitely could be a whole shir, multiple shirim, on the influence and the impact of the Sheres HaPleita here in Chicago, and how they really shaped and changed our community in various ways. The other thing to point out in terms of the difference in Rabbanim is how the needs and the challenges and the community changed over the years. Chicago from the 1980s, right? That's it's hard to believe it. 40 years ago, even 2000 is 20 years ago, right? 20 years ago seems like so soon. 20 years ago, they say 20 years ago now isn't what it used to be, right? 20. So, but the 1980s, Chicago was different in the 1980s. I mean, I was a little kid then, but Chicago was different. It just was. We didn't have people. We don't have a room looking like this. It will look different. Right? The community in the 1960s. You go back to the 1960s, right? Was different. It was totally different. In the 1940s, that was right after the war. In the 1940s, 1950s. At that time, in the 1940s, the community wasn't even living here in West Rogers Park. It was living on the west side. Everybody was living on the west side. There was a handful of people that lived in Albany Park, from at least in terms of the Frum Yidden. In the 1920s, there was communities living here. They were living in the 20s. They were starting to move to the Lawndale west side. They're living in the Maxwell Street area. We'll talk about that. The 1880s, that the community was just getting started, but it still existed. Really, then the 1860s was really the beginning, like we said, the beginning of the growth of the Kehillah. Right? This is just a really general map of where the different Kehillahs were. The most part, the Kehillah started in the Maxwell Street area. That was like this first Jewish ghetto, they called it, the Jewish ghetto, and it was really smushed together. And as the Yidden began to get a little bit more money, they moved away from call them like in New York, the tenement homes and the wooden homes in the Maxwell Street area. Most of the people moved to the Lawndale area, which is in Roosevelt Road and Independence Boulevard on the west side, and that became the teeming mass of Yidden in Chicago. Now, it's also kedai to point out that even before the 1860s, the the Kehillah, that's really the 1860s and 1880s more specifically, is when the Russian Yidden began to come to Chicago. Before that were the German Jews. German Jews began to come to Chicago. And the German Jews, when they came to Chicago, were nominally religious. They, the synagogues, the shuls that they had mikvos, and the Rabbanim talk about Shabbos and the things. They eventually, seemingly quickly, and that was, not necessarily only them, but the Germans, for the most part, a lot of them became irreligious very quickly. Became Reform, and their synagogues became Reform, and it's a sad situation. And Baruch Hashem, we have the Lubavitcher is doing a lot to stem the tide over there, but it really happened to the rest of the community as well. In Lawndale, you had a large group of Jews that lived there. Not all of them were religious, I would say. Not all of them were religious. There was, especially like not in the way which we call it today, but the Jews that lived in Lawndale, I call them Orthodox, not religious. They were Orthodox, not religious means that they all davened in a relatively frum shul of whatever persuasion it may be, that had some sort of division between the men and the women, some sort of mechitza, and they kept whatever they kept. They may personally not have kept Shabbos or whatever. They may have had some Friday night Suda, whatever it may be, but they davened in a frum shul with a frum rav, and that was the kehillah which they had, and that was the community. And the community kind of itself balanced itself out. The fact that you had the more religious and the less religious and the even less religious living basically in the same general neighborhood, it allowed, for the good, it allowed them to be influenced. For the bad, it allowed them to be influenced. But in Lawndale, in the West Side area, there was one Reform synagogue. That was it. There was 60 or 80, whatever the number may be, of from Orthodox synagogues. Right? There's a story, we could say the story of the Ridvaz, which we mentioned it before. The Ridvaz would take walks. That was something which he did, and he periodically mentioned this last time I gave a shir. He saw somebody being Bechal Shabbos. That's what happened. People came. Oh, these are some pictures of shuls. Right? This is just a good example. This picture. Right? This is a picture of a Russian Yid, came from Russia, and all of his kids became not religious. I know them, right? That family, right? The father has a beard. This picture not so much, but right, that's what it was. And the shuls. This is the Maxwell Street area. This is the Chicago community, which our ancestors grew up in. What did people do for business? This is also important. It's important to know what challenges the Rav has and what is he dealing with. If his community are all white collar workers, blue collar workers, whatever it may be. Many Jews, especially when they come off the boat, can't really communicate so well. Many of them were peddlers. They sold or picked up scrap metal or scrap. Some of them sold rags. Some people went into the used bottle business. Right? For example, Bernard Horowitz. We know Bernard Horowitz. We're going to mention him later. Bernard Horowitz, one of his businesses that he was involved with was used bottles. He used to hire people to pick up the used glass bottles, and then they would wash them out and resell them. That's what they did. He himself made a good parnasa from it. But the regular workers that were selling, they're barely eking out a living. This is a picture of the stockyards. Chicago had the biggest meat processing area in the community now in the United States, basically. This is like 20 city blocks was the area of the stockyards. A lot of Jews were involved in that area, and the Rabbanim, a lot of the Rabbanim, they didn't have full-time rabbis like we have today, where the rabbi gets a salary that he can actually, for the most part, sustain his whole family on that living. One rabbi, Rabbi Yehuda Goldman, he talks about how he would get paid 20 cents a week, just a penny. You got paid pennies. That's what, and they did. They felt an achrayas for their kehillos, but they had to make money somehow. So they got paid when they would do a wedding, or they would do a bris, or they would do this, or many people got paid for ashkacha, and that was how they made. I wouldn't say a parnasa, but that's how they eked out a living. Okay, so that I would say that is a general overview of the challenges and some of the backgrounds in terms of the Rabbanim. Rabbi Rappaport suggested that I speak over a couple of different Rabbanim that people don't know. So what I'm going to go through is, I think it's like 15 or 16 Rabbanim. I'm going to mention one or two facts about them, just to give us a general perspective about them, and then if we have time, we can take some questions. So one of the earliest Rabbanim is Rabbi Tudris Tiktin. Okay, I would say that he falls into this category of forgotten because nobody really knows him. He was basically one of the first Rav hired by the Beis Medrash Hagadol. You can see? You can see. Okay. See, you're moving your head. He established the Talmud Torah. This shul, Beis Medrash Hagadol, ended up becoming a precursor to the Ansei Shalom synagogue. So that was Rabbi Tiktin. We don't know very much about Rabbi Tiktin, but he was here in the 1860s. He actually retired. He stepped down for a few years to let another Rav in, and then he came back. So he was, that is Rabbi Tiktin. What? He was from Russia. I don't remember the exact location. There was a shul Anshe Tiktin. Most recently, it was on Foster. But then before that, it was on the west side somewhere. When it moved from the west side, not most shuls, a large percentage of shuls, 80%, no, not from him, but they're from the same place, Tiktin, right? They're from the same. So I think there was 2 shuls or 3 shuls with the name Tiktin, right? Most shuls. This is a discussion I would say in terms of the 50s and how American Jewry really affected the Rabbanim felt, at least the American Rabbanim, the rabbis that went to the Chicago Yeshiva, whatever it was, Orthodoxy was on what's called on the decline in those days, and conservative was on the rise, and there was always this push to, how to reclaim it. It wasn't strong like we have it today. It's very sad. The Rabbanim some of the Rabbanim thought that Yiddishkeit was going to be lost in America when the community jettisoned the west side, right? It wasn't that the move itself created a change, but it was just the final straw. And many of these shuls lost their mechitzas, became at best traditional or conservative, whatever it may be. That would be the example of the Tiktiner shul. Many of the shuls, as we'll see, many of the shuls were named after places, right? Anshe Tiktin, Anshe Calavera, Lubavitch, Anshe Lubavitch, right? What? Anshe Matala, right. Liden, Pinsk, they're all named after places, right? Then the nicknames, some of the shuls had nicknames. The carpenter shuls and the washerman shuls. Kins was known as the laundryman's shul. Okay, Rav Avram Broid. Rav Avram Broid was the Rav of Anshe Shalom Mariampol. Mariampol, I actually stem on my mother's side, stem from Mariampol. It's a city. There's actually 2 cities named Mariampol. One is in Ukraine and one is in Russia. But Rabbi Broid was the Rav of this shul, Oyev Shalom Mariampol. Just as an aside, if you see a shul, not just in Chicago, anywhere, if you see a shul with the name Shalom in the name, right? Sometimes that's a hint that sometimes there wasn't so much Shalom. That's just a hint, right? How did the Oyev Shalom? How did the Oyev Shalom start? Oyev Shalom Mariampol shul was called also the Straw Hat Shul. One of the Mispalim came to shul one day, and he was wearing a white straw hat. And the Gabbai got upset at him, like, that's not our minhag. We don't wear white straw hats in shul. And he kicked him out. So he got upset, and he took some of his friends with him, and they started another shul. It's another discussion on breakaway shuls and on how they start and why they start, and why it's a good thing and a bad thing. Okay, not our discussion. This is a picture of the BMZ. The BMZ, I don't know if anybody heard of the BMZ, Beis Moshe Zekanim. The Beis Moshe Zekanim was like an old age home, an assisted living home, let's call it, in those days. And it was a frum old age home that they had a couple hundred elderly Jews living there, men and women. And they had a shul, and they had a beis medrash, and they had all the different facilities that were there. They had speeches and drushes and the various activities. So this is Turn fuzzy. This is a picture of the shul in the original BMZ that Rabbi Broid was involved with. If you want to know a little bit of Yichus over here, I don't know if anybody has heard. I'm going to say a name. He's a descendant of Rabbi Broid, Rabbi Danny Olshel. I don't know if anybody knows him. He's a descendant of Rabbi Broid. Rabbi Annixter. We mentioned his son-in-law. We mentioned before. This is a quote. I'll read you the quote. It tells you, it's very telling about Rabbi Annixter. Rabbi Annixter could have been a Rav 200 years ago in Poland. At this point, it would have been 300 years ago, but okay. The world meant nothing to him. During his whole life, he prepared himself for the world to come by praying, studying the Talmud and hundreds of commentaries, preaching and settling disputes, bewailing the destruction of Yerushalayim and the temple. Right? That's what Bernard Horowitz, right, from the JCC, right, which you've never heard of, but that's what, it was his son-in-law was Rabbi Annixter. So Rabbi Annixter was also a Rav. The shul was Beis Medrash Oyev Emunah. This was in the 1870s till the 1914, and he was nifter. An interesting sub-fact about him. What? So the Oyev Emunah had a nickname. Should turn off the mic for a second? The Oyev Emunah had a nickname as the Halba Emunah. So, okay, we'll leave it at that. But Rabbi Annixter was a big Rav, and another way to learn about Rabbanim. There's a number of different ways we could talk about the tricks. I would say tricks of the trade, but one of the easiest tricks of the trade is to find a sefer by the rabbi, and then reading the introduction. Okay, when you read the introduction, I personally recommend reading the introduction of any book or sefer or anything that you come across, because the introduction of the book generally talks about it frames the books. It puts the book into a frame of reference, where the author is coming from, why the author wrote the book, what his modus operandi, what his approach is when he's writing the book. You get a lot of information out of reading the introduction to a book. For some reason, people skip it all the time. I also like the acknowledgments, but that's beside the point. But I don't know why people skip the introductions to books. You gain a lot out of reading the introductions. But so from Svarim, especially from authors from Chicago, I'm involved in a project now. I have over or about 100 Svarim from Rabbanim till the 1980s. From the 1867, I think, is the first sefer that was printed here. Thank you. Wanted to make sure you're listening. And I got 3 sons too. And what did I say? Oh yeah, right. These are this sefer Chidushim Avi is 1/3 of it is Chuvas, and the other part of it is Chidushim and Drashas. I would say those are the 3 pillars of most Svarim that are written in general, but especially early in the genre of early American Svarim is Drashas. They call it different things today. They call it, it's a Parsha sefer. That's the same thing as Drashas, with a slightly different style or bent to it. Shiloh's the Chuvas. That style is basically stayed the same, with obviously variations during the authors. Rabbi Annixter, especially in those days, Rabbanim would write Shilohs back and forth to Europe all the time. So a lot of great rabbis were involved in that. And then Hadronim is also a big thing. In terms of like a Gemara sefer, they don't have that so much here, but Hadronim was a big thing in terms of writing a Hadron. So that's also an interesting thing when you're looking into Svarim from the perspective of, I'm going to use a word that I'm not, historian, which I'm not a historian, I'm just a guy. But from that perspective of the Hadron, many times when somebody writes a Hadron, they write where they said the Hadron. So it's very interesting. You'll have a Hadron from a certain person who said it at the Sheikhtim. The Agudas HaSheikhtim used to make a Sima Shas every year. Right? Learn that fact from finding Hadronim. Sometimes you'll find a drasha from somebody who made it at the burning of the mortgage of a shul. Right? So you learn there was actually there's a number of drashas that are printed at the centennial of Abraham Lincoln's birthday. It was celebrated right here in Chicago by all the different shuls. It's just interesting to read about that. And so anyway, so this is the sefer from Rabbi Annixter. Rabbi Bernard Horowitz actually mentioned he wrote a book. His book was called My First 80 Years. It's just interesting perspective from somebody. He was religious. We could call him religious, and he talks about how he walked into his father-in-law's house, Rabbi Annixter, and he sees a pile of svarim that just came from the Beis HaTzvos, came from the printing house. His father-in-law, Bernard Horich's father-in-law, was this Rabbi Annixter. I would say that there's no picture of Rabbi Annixter, but it turns out that that's not true, but it is true. The only picture that I have available of Rabbi Annixter is a picture of him on his deathbed. So he's like laying in the bed and he looks like he's, they say he gave away his last $25 on his deathbed. He gave it to his grandson. He said, this is the last money that I have in this world. Please take it and give it away to tzedakah. That was Rabbi Annixter. Okay, we're just moving along because we're short on time. This is Rabbi Shmuel Aaron Pardes, and I'm skipping a number of years. Rabbi Shmuel Aaron Pardes came to Chicago in the 1920s, 1924, 1925, and he lived there for about 25 years. The biggest thing that Rabbi Pardes was known for was the journal, the Torah journal, the Torah monthly journal called HaPardes after him. That journal was really started a number of years prior back in Europe, and I forget the towns. I didn't write down any of the towns, Rabbi Rappaport.
I think even when he was in America, he was still getting letters from Rabbanim in Europe.
He was still getting letters from Rabbanim in Europe, but the biggest thing about the journal of Pardes was Rabbi Pardes lived in Chicago, and in every edition of the journal, he would write news. The news was this Rav became a Rav here, and this Rav became here, and this person made a Sima Shas and a Chanukah Sabayis. And it wasn't just Chicago, but because he lived here, that every single edition has news about Chicago, had Rabbanim who wrote Shtiklach Torah from Chicago. So almost every single edition, while Rabbi Pardes was the editor, had a strong push from Chicago Rabbanim. Yes, you can get them online. That's the easiest way. You can get most of the editions are available online. If you go to your local library, they may have some. I have a box of some of them somewhere. They're good to they're good to listen to. They're good to read. I guess they could have book on tape, but that doesn't exist yet. Rabbi Pardes was also involved in kashrus, as many of the Rabbanim were. He was involved in kashrus. He was also involved in a number of controversies and things, Ragabi kashrus and gelatin and things like that, which is a whole nother discussion. But he was a big figure in the American figure because he controlled the press. He controlled the press. He was the press. That's where a lot of people got the news from. So the Agudas HaRabbanim of America, the American Rabbinical Association, he was the mouthpiece that flowed through him to get that out to Rabbanim across America. Aside from the fact that he had a shul Bikur Kolim Anshe Poland, right? Or Anshe Warsaw, which is the predecessor of that. His shul ended up, after a couple of Gilgulim, ended up becoming the Agudas Yisrael of Peterson Park. Right? That's that same shul that he was in. The Lamja Gaon. What? Yeah.
So maybe afterwards, I'm trying to understand the demographic of these early Rabbanim. How many of them are Nusach Ashkenaz? How many of them are Hasidic? And how does that boil down to the fact that how does it evolve that today Chicago is predominantly a Nusach Ashkenaz community? And he's part of the I've been to Peterson Park, if I'm not mistaken, down in the South Side, is that correct?
Yeah.
Right. And some of these Rabbanim seem to be Hasidic from what I know. And how does that play out in the map of what the Kehillah looks like today?
Tough question. What? No, it's a very good question. A lot of the Rabbanim, that's the focus today is on Rabbanim. A lot of the Rabbanim morph themselves into whatever their Kehillah was. So they may have, and this happens today, right? The Rav of my shul davens Shmona Esrei Nusach Sfard, and the shul davens Nusach Ashkenaz. That's correct, because the name used to be, not even, they just kind of like morphed. So that's a hard simon to say. I would say like this: a percentage of the community kehila was Hasidus, not Hasidish like we see today, outwardly with Shreimelach and then with beards and with things like that. That for the most part didn't exist. Sometimes it came after the war a little bit. Maybe you could tie into the Eichensteins and some of the Turskis which came before the war, but for the most part not. Even the Chabad Rabbanim, I don't think that they, for the most part, but even some of them didn't, their shul, they themselves were not Chabad and their shul was, or they were and their shul wasn't. It's hard to know. So basically, I did not answer your question. Yeah? A little louder. I'm older than I used to be. Yeah? Right? Right? The yeshiva, this is a whole discussion. The history, I'm going to talk about the history of Chicago. It could be here for a couple of days. But yeah, the yeshiva was a massive force in Chicago. And as it grew, it produced a tremendous amount of rabbis and rabbanim, not just here in Chicago, but across the Midwest and beyond, and had oversized impact, I would say, on America, which sometimes on some levels is underplayed and sometimes it's overplayed, but that's the way it goes. But yeah, they davened Nusach Ashkenaz. Although Rabbi Rubenstein, who was called the father of the yeshiva, he was Chabad, I think. Debate, but he may have been or may not have been, depending on who asked his grandson. Right? Rabbi Merowan is Rabbi Rubenstein's grandson. So depending on how you ask the question, depends on how Chabad his father was. His father was the Rav of Bnei Ruvain. Right? After he was in South Chicago, he was the Rav of Bnei Ruvain, which is officially a Chabad shul, which became more Chabad after Rabbi Shusterman came, and as the days progressed. But okay, that's not my. I would tell you that there's a Bucky who in Chabad's history in Chicago, Rabbi Levi Teledan, he's going to give that share. I'm not going to give that share. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I used to go there. For the Afyomi shir with Rabbi Bechhofer, who I don't think was Chabad. Rabbi Shusterman was. But look what he built. The community is you know.
What his first day at work was? Giving husband for my grandfather.
Wow. Okay, Rabbi, we're up to Rabbi Gordon, the Lumjagon. The Lumjagon was a towering figure in Chicago, right? When we talk about the chief rabbi of Chicago, everybody says the Ridvaz was the chief rabbi of Chicago, which is true. But he was here for a year. The Ridvaz was here for a year. The Lumjagon was never voted in as the chief rabbi of Chicago. Now, he also was only here for a few years. Okay, but many of the things which we do here are from the Lumjagon. The Lumjagon he organized what's called the Kehila, Agudas HaKehilas, of the first real rabbinic organization of rabbis here in Chicago, that got the rabbanim of all the different shuls together to become a unified force. That eventually morphed into what was called the Merkaz HaRabbanim, which again no longer exists. But that's the multiplier. That's the force multiplier. When you get one person can do a lot. When you get two people, they can do much more, right? Then you can start, that's the Gemara in Sota in terms of how big were the payros that the spies brought back from Eretz Yisrael, and in terms of the multiplier on Tov Meshnayim and Echad. Once you have the Rabbanim getting together, and that they can really work on the community, and that was his force. He was an amazing figure in terms of what he did back in Europe, back in Lumja, in terms of the community, in terms of the period after the war, meaning after the First World War, and how he was able to learn languages. He learned English before he came to America. It's sad. It seems that one of the reasons why he came to America was that one of his sons was here, and he kind of wanted to come back to bring him back on the derech. It didn't really happen. for that son. Although his daughter came and married Rabbi Regensburg, he did a representation, and this is an amazing thing. And this is like one of the saddest things is that there's so many great rabbanim, but the chinuch didn't exist, and the circumstances didn't exist to allow continuation for many rabbanim, not just the rabbanim, everybody. The descendants that they may have been from, and their descendants weren't. That's the tragedy of America. Yeah.
There's two questions that are arising from all this. Number one is, why didn't the West Side community have like a real structure with schools and everything, that they would stay there instead of running away? What was it? What was missing?
Yeah. Okay. What's the second question? No. Yeah.
The Rabbi and the Lumbergun. It seems like Chicago could not hold on to the great rabbis.
No.
The Lubavitcher came and saw Chicago and went back to New York.
I can't answer that. I mean, I can. The Lumbergun passed away. He had a heart attack and he passed away. Right? Many rabbanim passed away. The Radvaz was a unique situation. I would say that was a personality clash and a conflict of different things which we're not going into. Chicago has an ability to keep many rabbanim. Sometimes it doesn't happen. I don't think it's any more or less than other communities. And New York is just multiplying so large than Chicago that you can't. It's not completely not comparable. Right. Okay, the Lumbergun, one thing about the Lumbergun, this is a picture of his Levaya. Thousands of people were at his Levaya, outside of his shul, Tiferes Zion. Interesting, another interesting thing, I keep saying more things that we're not going to talk about, but another study is the study of shul buildings in Chicago and what happened to them, which is really a sad thing. You go to the West Side now, they're either destroyed or they're buildings for other religions. So this shul, you can see it in the background, the Tiferes Zion shul, is still standing now and is no longer a church. It become apartment buildings. What? Condominiums. It turns into condominiums. The Agudas Achim and the north side also became condominiums. It's okay. The worst things can happen. But anyways, the Lumbergun was the one who started the takana, which at one point fell away, but then came back, of not having a levayas in shul, not bringing the mace into shul. The minhag in Chicago is not to bring the mace and the body of a person who passed away, not to bring them into shul. A number of different reasons for that. Kahanim aside, also in terms of the kedusha, even a rav, that the halacha does allow for a rav in his kehillah to have a hesped in the shul. Even he still didn't allow it. You can see here that's the hearse that had the levaya outside for him. That is one, and the Lumbergun, aside from this, also was a Rabbi in the yeshiva. He was involved in all elements of the community. He was obviously, based on the number of people at his levaya, was extremely beloved by the kehillah. He was only here for a few years. Rabbi Rubenstein. We talked about Rabbi Rubenstein. Here's Rabbi Rubenstein. This is one of my favorite pictures. I don't know why it's so fuzzy. It's fuzzy. That's what happens. Okay, it's fuzzy. But this is one of my favorite pictures of Rabbi Rubenstein. He's giving a shir klali in the yeshiva. Right? He was known as the father of the yeshiva. The yeshiva, in Chicago, the yeshiva started in his house. With one or two of his sons and a guy named Shepherd Baum and a number of other people. I think it was 7 boys altogether. He lived a little bit further south from the regular community. He lived in a place called South Chicago, which after some research is basically just a little bit south of Hyde Park for the most part. South Chicago. It's a neighborhood, but it was not South Shore. It's called South Chicago. I don't think it's a suburb. I think it's actually part of the. It's a neighborhood. Yeah, but it's too far. It was too far for the boys to commute, so they ended up going to school there, and then he would give them shir in the afternoon. They would live in his living room until it basically became an untenable situation where you can't have like 6 or 7 bakrim living in your house. They ended up going to the Anshe Knesset Yisrael shul for a while as the yeshiva grew, and then they became a little bit wild, and they got kicked out because they were breaking things, which is what normal boy activity was. And then they went to the Grenshaw streets. But anyways, Rabbi Rubenstein was known as the father of the yeshiva, ended up becoming the Rav in the Bnei Ruvain. He was a tremendous Baal Tzedakah, and he ended up he never really had an official position in the yeshiva. Once it started in the 23, 24, he never had an official position there, but he was involved with the running, and he had a day, and he was he was involved, and he was also part of the Agudas Anshe Chabad. Also, he was involved with. Okay, Rabbi Avram Lesser. I'm going back in time a little bit, the 1880s. This is the Rav that we said Rabbi Tikhtin stepped down. This is the Rav that stepped in after Rabbi Tikhtin stepped down. Rabbi Avram Gershon Lesser was one of the leading Rabbanim in America at that time. He ended up moving to Cincinnati after he was here in Chicago in the 1890s. He moved to Cincinnati, but he was constantly coming back to Chicago for various things and was involved. And a lot of, there isn't so much of a picture of what he did. A little bit. He was involved. This is a picture, and it's just like fuzz. It's an early picture of the Agudas HaRabbanim, a conference in, I think it was 1913, here in Chicago. This is Rabbi Lesser here. Half of the Rabbanim here are from, this is Rabbi Epstein, from Chicago. About half the Rabbanim in that picture from Chicago. What? Oh, so no. Rabbi Lesser wrote a couple of Sfarim. He wrote a sefer called Be'achris Hayamim, and he wrote a sefer called I think it's called Beis Medrash. The sefer Be'achris Hayamim is an interesting work. He had an involvement with one of the earlier champions of Zionism, we could call that. Right, this is a whole other discussion in terms of Zionism and the love for Eretz Yisrael that Chicago had, which seems to be more than other communities had. But there was a evangelical minister called Blackstone. I think that was his name, Blackstone. And he was involved for his evangelical reasons, which I don't know, but he was interested in Eretz Yisrael, and they wrote like letters and proclamations to President Harding and various things. And at one point there was a sort of symposium that he wanted Rabbi Lesser to speak at, and he kind of wasn't so interested, but he ended up writing something, which is this Sefer Achris Hayamim, which somebody then translated into English. So the Sefer has a Hebrew and English side. Achris Hayamim, where he's talking about Yemos HaMashiach and these kinds of things. And at the other Sefer Beis HaMedrash is Chidushim Maseches Psachim and things. That's where we know a lot of the various things about him. He was also involved in a number of, let's call it Dinei Torah, and arbitrating a number of, financial disputes and things between organizations. He was involved in the start of the Marx Nathan orphanage, which I guess the Betsy and Nathan Marx were people that were part of his shul, and they ended up donating money. They wanted to donate either to a hospital or to an orphanage, to start an orphanage, and that he was involved in that. He was involved in a number of different things. But he was one of the I would say forgotten giants. Rabbi Goldman, how much more time do we have, Rabbi? We have muffins. Okay. As long as there's muffins, as long as they speak for? What?
I'm not stopping you.
You're not stopping me. Okay, that could be a bad choice, but okay. That's fine. I'm happy to keep going. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda Goldman. Rabbi Yehuda David Goldman was one of the oldest active Rabbanim here in Chicago. Actually, the oldest active Rabbanim. He was over 100 years old when he was still a Rav, still serving as a Rav. Oldest active Rabbanim in America. He died in 93. He was involved. He was the secretary of the Merkaz HaRabbanim. So a lot of the letters that come out that have been found from the Merkaz HaRabbanim are in his handwriting, are from his pen. And either questions or discussions or whatever it may be, he was the front end for those. The Merkaz HaRabbanim, again, was one of the organizations of the Rabbanim here in Chicago, where they when he passed away, it kind of fizzled out. It kind of sort of officially exists, but I don't think it's very active now. What? No, not anymore. They used to meet every other Tuesday. They used to meet every other Tuesday at the Adas in Albany Park, and before that, they would meet on the first floor on the yeshiva on the west side. I know that because it says so on the stationery. I don't know why, but stationery was a big thing. Everybody had their own stationery. Like if you it didn't exist if you didn't have your own personalized stationery. What? It was like a website, but yeah, it's like official letterhead. It's amazing. I didn't put him in the first official Rosh Hashiva of the yeshiva. Rabbi Yablonsky. Let me finish this. Rabbi Yablonsky. So he came in. The yeshiva started in 24 official. I think it was 24. Right. He has a letterhead where the letter is dated 19, like a year and a half earlier, where he's like listed already. Where there's just constantly learned things about people, not only their addresses and their telephone numbers, but what their positions were, and then different things. Yeah.
You actually have to have a letterhead to file certain government things for taxes.
That could be. That could be. That could be.
But it's also very useful.
Yeah, it's very useful now. It's very useful now. Okay, Rabbi Goldman wrote a memoir. Wrote a memoir in Yiddish, which was then translated. So I have the translated version. He wrote a memoir, autobiography in Yiddish, where he talks about his life. And he was involved when he came to America. He basically bounced from shul to shul. And he writes about his experiences as a Rav, which is really eye-opening. He's like, a Rav was not honored like they were today. The Rabbanim were dirt, he basically writes. They were dirt. Like they didn't have any control. Is the Rav speaking today? It's not the Rav's choice if the Rav speaks or not. It's the president. The president decides the guy's not speaking. He's not speaking. The Rav decides that they don't have money to pay the rabbi. They didn't pay the rabbi. Right? So he used to walk miles. He was actually the rabbi at 3 shuls concurrently to make a parnasa. He writes. It's a very interesting autobiography. What makes it even slightly more interesting is that Rabbi Goldman's son, Alex Goldman, was a conservative rabbi who wrote his own memoirs, and seemingly based on his father's memoirs, or just because they lived with his father's son. Many of the stories are the same, but have a slightly different perspective. So it's just interesting to see the perspective from the father and the perspective from the son of the same story, using that same manuscript as a source. So Rabbi Goldman was involved. And the last shul that he was involved in, the last 2 shuls was, the first one was Anshe Yanova in Albany Park, and then the Chevra Kedisha Machziki Adas. The Machziki Adas was basically on the Van, or just north of the Van. An interesting fact about that, in the 70s, I think it was the 70s or the 60s, at one point the shul was bombed right before they were about to open up the shul, the Avda Chanukah Sabayis. The shul was bombed right around this time of year, January 1st, at the end of December time. They don't know. They don't know who did it. While we have interesting letters and things, this is a picture of the inside of the shul.
What was the year about?
About the 60s. Early 60s. There was a number of shuls that were bombed in the 60s. We could talk about violence against Jews as another discussion, or anti-Semitism in Chicago. Again, no different than the rest of the world, but also, what?
Was this anything to do with Muslim?
No.
In the early 60s?
No.
What was it from? What was the power? I was a little kid.
Don't know.
But you're an adult now.
Yes, Rabbi Zevin. Rabbi Zevin is one of the great rabbis of Chicago. He's not forgotten, and the reason why he's not forgotten, one of the reasons why he's not forgotten, is that anytime you go to Waldheim and you park in that little parking lot right there, his Olam is right there. Rabbi M. Zevin, Rabbi Mordechai Zevin, and he was the Rav of Anshe Lubavitch, and he was a cousin to the more famous Rabbi Shlomo Zevin. He was a cousin to him. And the interesting thing about Rabbi Zevin is that he was buried on a Sunday, when they never had burials on Sunday, and that only changed recently. But they were able to organize. I think they had to talk to the governor that he was able to have his kvura on a Sunday. What? Everybody was involved in the yeshiva. Only a little, not a lot. But and that's also not true. Not everybody was involved in yeshiva, but it was such a strong force that it's like saying everybody was an ardent Zionist. Which what? He was a Chabad Chassid. He was a Chabad Chassid. Yes. Everybody was an ardent Zionist, which is true, but it has a different connotation than it does today. And everybody was involved in the yeshiva, and again, both of those are broad general statements. Okay, Rabbi Meisel's, the Weitzner of, right? If you would make a list of the top 10 or top 5 Rabbanim with influence in Chicago, definitely the Weitzner of is towards the top of that list, no question asked. The Weitzner of came after the war. He was the Rav in before most prior to Chicago. He was the Rav in the Bergen-Belsen DP camp. Before that, he was in Weizen. He was a Dayan in Weizen. But here in Chicago, he involved himself in all areas of the community except for Kashrus, because he knew that he didn't want to get involved with that. Other people, as he mentioned, got involved in that, and it wasn't so good. He was involved in the mikvahs, and involved in chinuch, and involved in many of the other parts of the community. That is Rabbi. That is the Weitzner Rav. It's an interesting picture of the Vada Chinuch meeting, one of the Vada Chinuch meetings at the Beis Yaakov, the parochial school. He's unique, I would say, among Rabbanim, probably around the world, that he was involved in 3 schools, in the founding of 3 schools. Right? He was involved in the parochial school, which is the Yeshivas Tferes Tzvi. He's the Tzvi in Tferes Tzvi. The Weitzner Cheder is named after him, started by his son-in-law. And the Hannah Sachs. He started Hannah Sachs because he didn't want to send his daughters to a mixed school, so he created that school. Rabbi Saul Silber was the first president of the yeshiva. He was the first president of the yeshiva, although there was one president who came before him. He was the first president of the yeshiva. That's a different discussion. Rabbi Saul Silber was unique among Rabbanim of that time in terms of he had a much more Americanized look and feel to him. He spoke in English. He allowed English to be spoken from his pulpit by the students. He could relate a lot more to Americans, let's say, as opposed to having the old European feel to him. He was he was not clean shaven, but he was close shaven, and he was the decade 1913 to 1940s. He's the first one without a big. He has a big yarmulke, but not the up. A lot of that has to do with his perspective and where he learned, and that's I'm not gonna go into that. But it influenced the founding of the yeshiva, really. In terms of the yeshiva was unique among other yeshivas, let's say, in that not that I don't say they demanded, but they had it wasn't Torah only. It was also involved with other learning involved also, and that's something that he pushed, that he felt was important. That the Rabbanim need to be, and the rabbis that they create need to be mu'urav and need to be able to relate to their kehilas and need to be educated in that regard, not just on Shas and Poskim, which there was a large bend for. Rabbi Nachum B. Sachs, I think we're almost done. Yeah, we got 3 more left. Rabbi Nachum B. Sachs was the son-in-law of Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank. He was the son-in-law of Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, who was the chief rabbi in Yerushalayim. And he came to America to raise funds for the Kehillah in Eretz Yisrael. He was in New York, and he got mugged. He got mugged. All the money that he had was stolen. He came to Chicago. He stayed by his friend Rabbi Rubenstein, and Rabbi Rubenstein the next morning brought him to the yeshiva, and he basically told him they walked into a shirum. And about 2 minutes later, he said, "Okay, Rabbi Sachs, you take over from the Rav." And he was able to do so, and he was taught in the yeshiva and was involved in recruiting. He ended up becoming involved in the Kehillah that organization which you mentioned before. He was the let's call him the executive director. He was involved in the running it, I would say, running it and fundraising it and organizing, doing all the organizing for that. With growing out of that, the activities of Kehillah, aside from kashrus, also involved chinuch, and that grew into the ATT, the Associated Talmud Torahs. He was the founder of the ATT, together with other people, but he was involved. He was also involved in raising millions of dollars in tzedakah in terms of the Vada Yeshivas and the Vada Tzala to go to Yidden in Europe. His wife was named Hannah or Chana Sachs, which that's the school which over there on the school Hannah Sachs is named after Rabbi Nachman ben Sion's wife, his Rebbetzin. What? She's a daughter of Rassi Pesach Frank. Rassi Pesach Frank had a number of daughters. It seems that he had at least 3 son-in-laws that lived here in Chicago at one time. Rabbi Sachs lived here the whole time. Rabbi Sachs had the longest running Gemara shir of anybody. It was over, I think it was over 50 years that he gave a Shabbos Gemara shir in Chicago.
Was Rassi Frank ever in Chicago?
No. I don't think once he got there to Israel, I don't think he ever left. Yeah, he was never in Chicago. Reb Grunem Landau was his son-in-law. It didn't.
It's a pretty American look for a son.
It's a very American look. But that's Rabbanim in Chicago, right?
But he came from Eretz Yisrael.
He came from Eretz Yisrael. It's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, but all of his descendants are from. So like,
was the mugging, was it anti-Semitic or was it just a random?
The mugging? I think he had a lot of cash on him, and that was. I think it was cash related. That's what I think. I don't know. No way to know.
In New York?
I think that was in New York. Yeah. But it was hashkacha because otherwise he would have gone back, and they would, who doesn't have a karas hatov to what he accomplished? Rabbi Rogov, you Talmud Rabbi Rogov? No, Rabbi Rogov also came after the war. He was in Shanghai. He was like the address for shilas in Shanghai. He came here after the war. He was a humble tzaddik. He was a walking shas. He taught in the yeshiva. He was like one of the top rebbeim in the yeshiva. An interesting story about Rabbi Rogov in the 60s. I didn't answer his question about the neighborhood. Why didn't the Rabbanim try to stop the downfall of the West Side? The answer is that it was unstoppable. Right? The circumstances created the perfect storm where it was unstoppable. And a lot of that had to do with societal changes and socio-economical changes and political changes. Oh, that's a nice way to say it. Yeah. The neighborhood became very unsafe very quickly. And everyone, it was literally a mass exodus. Anyways, at one point, while the neighborhood was not so safe, there was a riot, some sort of riot. I don't know the details. The story, this is the story as I heard it. There was some sort of riot going on, and Rabbi Rogov was walking to the yeshiva, and he wasn't paying attention necessarily to what was going on. He was thinking and learning, and he basically walks through the riot. And as he walks, the people that were protesting or whatever it was, they kind of did a Kriyas Yamsuf, they split. And then he gets up to the police barricade. The police, this is the way he said the story, the police basically moved the barricade away. Rabbi Rogov walks through, they put the barricades back, everybody starts fighting again, like he wasn't there. Right. I don't know if anyone, Ricky Rothner used to give Rabbi Rogov rides. So one time he commented on he got a new car, which is not a new used car. So he said, Rabbi, why don't you drive? He said, I can't drive. By the time I'm too busy thinking about it. By the time I realize that it's a red light, right? I'll be through it on the other side. And he was an amazing giant, and in terms of, I would say he wasn't really a Rav, but he was on the Rosh Hashiva side of things. But I threw him in. Another interesting Rav. I didn't have all the details handy, so I didn't put it up. But to mention the Hasidus, who's another forgotten Rav that was here was the Besamina Rav. The Besamina Rav was Rabbi Lieberman. There actually were 2 Rabbi Liebermans that were here. One Rabbi Lieberman was Lubavitch. He was the principal of YTT. He ended up moving to Antwerp.
Before YTT, he was the Rav of Yeruven for a short period.
Yeah, he was a Rav, very short period of time. It was called the Beis Yaakov. It was called the Beis Yaakov. This is the other Rabbi Lieberman, and this other Rabbi Lieberman was the principal of the Beis Yaakov, and he ended up moving to Antwerp, which is interesting because he was the Hasidic Rav in Antwerp. The Litvish Rav in Antwerp was Rabbi Kreisworth. Rabbi Kreisworth, who also was here in Chicago. So you had two Chicago Rabbanim. This Besamina Rav he came in after the war. Here you have in this picture, it's hard to see, you have Rabbi Eichenstein, you have the Besaminer, and the Weissner Rav's brother that were here. Who was the Besaminer Rav? The Besaminer Rav was he was the Rav from Besaminer. he what? What? What a coincidence! What a coincidence! He got out of Rabbanis. He stayed in Rabbanis here in Chicago for a few years. What was his first shaila? He writes, what's the first shaila that he got here? I don't remember. Something Yitzchak. It was printed in like in the 890s by his children. What? So the first shaila, really the first two shailas were a guy comes to him and he wants to know. He knows that an ovel can't work. He wants to know that an ovel can't work, and his father is deathly ill. So he wanted to know that could he sit shiva early, before his father passes away. That way, when his father passes away, he won't miss work during the busy season. That was the first shaila. The second shaila that he got was also related to Avelis, and he said he knew that an Avel is not allowed to work. When a person is sitting Shiva, they're not allowed to go to work. So he said, on Shabbos, I don't sit Shiva, so can I go to work? Right? So that's a very telling, like it was like
What year is that?
60s. Ricky used to go learn by the Besamina Rav in the Albany Park, and he ended up closing shop. He couldn't do it. It wasn't for him. It was too idle. It wasn't for him. But that's at least a little bit of the picture. Here's a few more pictures of some more of the forgotten Rabbanim. Rav Shaul Yedidya Shachat wrote a many Svarim. He was a Rav in Edgware? No, not Edgware. No. He was a Rav in England, Scotland or England first. I want everybody to keep their eyes and ears open for him. The makom of the kvura of Rabbi Shachat is somewhere. We think it's somewhere in Waldheim, but no one actually found it yet. So if anybody finds the Matseva, Shaul Yedidya Shachat. Shaul Yedidya Shachat. He wrote B'nai Ruvain. Maybe? Okay, we'll take a look. He wrote a number of Svarim, Teres Yedidya, and Avashal. Interestingly, in the back of his Svarim, they're all like I would say paper. There's some are like cardboard covers and things. But in the back, there's a list of all the subscribers. So there's like pages and pages of Rabbanim and Shuls and the Shul presidents and things that gave him money to help publish each one of his Svarim. Rav Avram Hamburger was one of the rabbis in the Tver Sion Shul that had a tremendous hatzlacha with Rabbanim in that Shul. I don't know anything about him other than this one newspaper article, is that he died during a Siddur Aget. He was involved with writing a get for a couple that was getting divorced, and at one point he put his head down and he didn't pick his head back up. So which I guess one easy way to make sure that they stay married is that don't let the get go on. Rabbi Ephraim Malach was involved in chinuch. I one time had to sit down with Rabbi Yitzchak Sender. I don't know if anybody remembers Rabbi Sender. I don't have words to describe Rabbi Sender in all of his facets, but I sat down with Rabbi Sender once in his house, and we were just talking about Rabbanim, and I had a list. I said, Rabbi Malach, and his eyes like glazed over a little bit. He's like, oh, I remember Rabbi Malach standing on his porch, whatever. And then he said, Rabbi Malach, Kishmo Kenhu. His name, that's who he was. He was a Malach, he was an angel. That was Rabbi Malach. Rabbi Yaakov Levitt wrote an interesting sefer on tefillin, the mitzvah of tefillin. He said the mitzvah of tefillin is not so strong in our days, and he wrote a sefer on the mitzvah of tefillin. Okay, Rabbi Shalom Miles. All I know about Rabbi Miles is this picture of Rabbi Miles, and that he was 100 years old during that picture. I don't know anything more about Rabbi Miles. Rabbi Leonard Oshri. These are many of the Rabbanim. Again, the hundreds of Rabbanim. What? No, he's a cousin. Rabbi Leonard Oshri is a cousin. He ended up becoming a rav in South Africa for a number of years, and then he started working for the WZO in Eretz Yisrael. He was involved in chinuch here. He was involved in chinuch here in the early 60s period of time. Yeah. That's it. I'm finished, by the way. Yeah. Yeah.
I used to hear comments about his father, but how did that whole family become such a big thing in Chicago?
Rabbi Eichenstein's father and his grandfather, Rabbi Eichenstein's grandfather, came here in 23. I don't remember why they came here, but they came here and they opened up a shul, and yeah.
Was it on Devon to begin with?
No. It was on the west side. The Eichensteins and Bnei Ruvain were basically there was 2 or 3 shuls that did not sell to churches. And they basically just lost that real estate, got condemned and got lost. Yeah. So
Are those buildings still standing?
No. They're all gone. They're all gone. So this is a small sliver of some of the Rabbanim and some of the little of the history. There's a tremendous amount to learn, and then we can get into lessons and sugyas and things. So at least a little bit to whet our palate, more than the muffins that are still here. And that's it. Thank you for inviting me, and I was happy to come.